Now that you've heard a little bit of background about overrepresentation of special education with minority students, I'm going to talk about the main controversy that's going to be argued today. The controversy is overrepresentation of minorities in special education a result of either teachers and principals and maybe their lack of training and the misuse of referrals, or is it a result of environmental factors and biological reasons? While Jen and Abby argue the different sides of this controversy today, I want you to keep in mind a question that can help you decide which side that you like the best and how you feel about the issue. So the question I want you to keep in mind is making an impact on overrepresentation of minorities in special education beyond accomplishment in the public schools? So now, Jen and Abby are both going to present you with a little bit of background information about their argument.
Alright, first I want to explain low and high incident disabilities. There's a dramatic difference between the diagnosis of low incident disabilities, such as severe mental retardation, cerebral palsy, deaf, and blindness, versus the high incident ones, which are mild mental retardation, learning disabilities, and behavior disorders. These were all defined by Rishley of 1988. The problem of the overrepresentation of these minority students does not exist in the diagnosis of these low incident disabilities. So that leads us to believe that the high incident disabilities require an extensive degree of professional judgment, and that comes into a consensus as to determine this disability. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the low incidents require specific people and expertise in these areas. When it's milder, then there's no definite standards that are required, and the diagnosis can be more fluid, and a student can move from one state to another, or they can even get over one of these high diagnosis incident diagnosis. And it is the very nature of these high incident disabilities that are why it makes them so frequent, and that they continue to contribute to errors in the public schools referral and replacement process.
Now, Abby, would you like to give us a little bit of your background information?
Yes, the side I will be arguing is that eliminating overrepresentation is beyond the scope of the public schools. And that is mainly because there are a lot of environmental and biological factors that go into the development of a child that are outside of the classroom. And some biological and environmental factors are things such as family, the health of the child, the socioeconomic status of the child, and a little later we'll talk a lot about poverty, whether that child is an immigrant, what their home life is like. All of these things are things that the child interacts with that the school has no control over. And because of that, the overrepresentation issue is very complex and not as easily resolvable. And intervention for this issue may require them going beyond the schools.
Okay, great. How might you all say that biases play a role in overrepresentation? Jen, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. The school's personnel may have unconscious biases that are against specific ethnic groups, but this can be addressed through the schools. And there are many effective ways. There's different programs that can be instilled into the school's program, and it will allow the personnel to discover their own personal grievances against certain ethnic groups, and it will empower the school district personnel to recognize these and attempt to find ways to correct them. And it will also help that they can grow professionally because of this, and it will increase their ownership for making these decisions. And because of these biases, which I am acknowledging do exist, and there's been many lawsuits that are related to this issue of misdiagnosing based on biases, such as groups have brought this point up through the NAACP, which is an ethic advocacy group. But because of these concerns, they are going to implement different programs to try to address this problem and fix it so that it will not continue in the future.
Now, how would you like to argue that?
Well, while we also do agree that biases are present in every teacher, Donovan and Cross 2002 make the point that minority students do get into more behavioral and academic problems, and because of this, teachers are more likely to be biased against those students because they represent a hardship for them. And while training teachers and putting teachers through workshops that will hopefully fix this bias problem, that is just human nature that the school system cannot completely change. Bias do exist, and to change that would be very difficult, and beyond the scope of schools. It would be within the person to change that about themselves.
One thing I wanted to quick add too is this is most prominent in the South, and there is the most racial discrimination of African Americans in Southern America for special education, but that's where schools should be focusing, getting these programs possibly through government or state regulations, and of course that's all according to Lawson and Orfield of 2002.
Yes, and because of these biases, the referrals for minority students is always going to be higher because of the unfair bias that a teacher possesses a lot of times for minority students.
All right, so you just mentioned something about referrals. So how does that really affect anything that has to do with overrepresentation?
Well, referrals are not uncommon to find in schools that don't have, or it is not uncommon to find schools that don't have school psychologists, school social work, school nurses, or counselors, and all of these people contribute to the diagnosis process, according to Arnold and Lossman of 2003. But unfortunately, these personnel are not always available, and because of that, the referral process lies within the school themselves and the teachers and the principals and such forth. But many of these teachers have little knowledge of the special education process, and they're just not as informed about this area, and that leads, of course, to false diagnosis. However, we're suggesting that an increase of teacher support on issues of special education, such as making strong RTI teams, may reduce the amount of these false referrals. Schools and teachers also sometimes get sort of rewarded when they meet SOL standards and they have really high test scores and so forth. And to keep those high standards, if a teacher comes across a student who may be struggling academically, the teacher might feel more prone to admit them or refer them to special education, because very often special education children are not included in the results from testing for standardized tests. So by getting the lower academic achieving students out of the general education classroom and into the special ed classroom, it will raise their overall school test scores and, get them looking better to the public. So, but I think that by having, like I said, the strong RTI teams and things, we would be able to pinpoint who actually should be moved and who is being moved inappropriately, possibly for, a chance to increase ratings or whatnot.
Okay, and one thing that you mentioned were some behavior issues. So does that have anything to do with the teacher's classroom management?
Absolutely. I think that the highest rates of overrepresentation of minorities in the schools are with the high concentrations of low-income areas. And statistically, low-income areas do have higher minority populations. These schools are less likely to experience well-trained teachers, and if the teachers don't have good classroom management, then it may lead to a lack of academic achievement, and it may exacerbate behavior problems. There is a growing body of research that has pointed to the critical role of the context that can play in achievement and in behavior. The same child can perform very differently depending on the level of the teacher's classroom management. And there's these things called single referrals, where a student might be experiencing difficulty in only a single class, and this indicates that possibly maybe the referring teacher has a sharp insight about the student, or it may indicate that there's a problem with perhaps like a personality conflict between the teacher and the student. And teachers who have students who are disruptive or have challenging behaviors in the classroom, they might be inclined to refer these children to special education as EH or emotionally disturbed, so that they can be removed from the classroom. But if you do have strong teacher who is able to handle these types of situations and control her classroom, then it will help control these behavior problems, and it'll make it easier to pinpoint who actually needs to be referred for EH or whatnot. And then so by the good classroom management, like I said, it can reduce aggressive behavior, but it also can create a better learning environment for the rest of the class. And when the class is running smoothly, everyone is able to take in the information and the lessons that the teachers are teaching easier. And so that might also raise the academic level of all the students, and especially those who might be having a little extra trouble.
And yes, Donovan and Cross 2002 also agree that the resources available to students in minorities and low SES areas are more likely to be substandard. But they also make the point that while good teachers often do promote better classrooms and better behaving students, there are a limited amount of these teachers, and that there is an issue in low income, a lot of times urban areas, with attracting good teachers to the school system. And because of this, although government policies would help with training teachers better and providing these resources, the school also needs to look at the circumstance that is presented in front of them. And a lot of the times that circumstance is one of just poor teacher quality. And the school system needs to learn to work with what they have. And a lot of times that is going to be poor teacher quality that leads to bad behavior. A lot, like we said before, poverty becomes a big issue with students and what they bring to the classroom outside of the teacher. And poverty is associated with a lot of problems in early development. There are higher rates of exposure to harmful toxins, including lead, alcohol, tobacco, in students that come from lower SES homes. And poorer children are also more likely to be born with low birth weights, have poor nutrition, and have just home and child care environments that are less supportive of early cognitive and emotional development. And the teachers or the parents also play a huge role in the development of students. Early education, even before the child reaches a classroom, a lot of times determines how the student is going to act in the classroom? Are they going to be behind? So a lot of students from poor areas, which Jen said earlier, a lot of times minorities do live in the poor areas, are already going to be behind from the start, which is all out of the scope of people in the school system to help them with that.
Okay, great. Well, both Abby and Jen have made great arguments for each side of the controversy, so hopefully you've taken the information that they've given you and you've formed your own opinion about this controversy.
Bye.